Well, it's just the three of us at the moment, but for everyone who's watching remotely, hello and welcome to our summer educational series. This is something I wanted to put together, and our whole team is sort of involved in it. Just thinking through some of the common things that we hear people talk about with getting through their training cycles healthy, and trying to give you guys the power of the knowledge to hopefully avoid that situation where you're sitting in our office in September. I always call September Save My Chicago month, because people are trying to make it to the Chicago starting line healthy. So we'll expand on this in a minute. I'm gonna get my PowerPoint fired up here. It's like you always have to do the little share. I'm gonna share my screen song. Okay, let's see here. Oh man, it's paused again, isn't it? Why is this happening to me? You guys can't see that, right? Yeah. I think I have a Zoom issue whenever I go. Yeah, it doesn't like presenter mode, so we are gonna do our best. Okay. All right. Hopefully this isn't too busy for you guys. Just gonna drag this out a bit. Okay. All right, so from the top, again, as I was saying, I really wanted to create this so that you guys had the knowledge to try to stay healthy, or not try to stay healthy, but to stay healthy through a full training cycle. And so today is sort of the kickoff presentation. So it's a lot of these things are going to get expounded upon over the course of the series, which lasts through the second week in August. But I wanted to give a good primer and get sort of the checklist down, like, okay, what boxes do I need to check so to make sure I'm ready to start ramping up my mileage and intensity to get ready to do a certain race. And of course, I'm going to talk a lot probably about marathon training, because we think about, that's typically what we think about when we think about fall races, but really this goes for any big goal that you might be chasing. So whether you want a 5K PR or a marathon PR, all these things certainly apply. Okay, so here we are at the start line. This is obviously a track start line, but metaphorical all the same. Today we're going to talk about the psychological and physiological preparation. So I talk kind of, you're going to use the words physical and physiological interchangeable, because we talk a little bit both about what might be going on side physiologically in terms of blood work, and then a little bit more broader in terms of physically, in terms of strength and all of those things as well. But just trying to think of the whole kind of brain body combination here, because we need to be firing on all cylinders if we're going to hopefully run a PR. So this is a silly little thing I came up with, because I was thinking, okay, really this starts at the end, right? So getting ready for your next training cycle starts at the end of your previous training cycle. So this is that reflection period of what went right, what went wrong, what things do we want to repeat, and what things do we not want to repeat the next time we go after some sort of goal or try to train for a race, right? And so I came into this circle of life, Lion King type of metaphor here. So taking some time to reflect with your training partners, with your family, with anyone who's on your team. We're going to talk about your support team a lot today, because building that support team and identifying those people who are going to be with you through thick and through thin, and whether the race goes well or not is going to be an important piece of it. And so, I reflect oftentimes with my athletes as a coach, and then I reflect with my coach when I have a race, just talking through what happened, not only during race day, but how did that training cycle go as a whole. I talk a lot about this whole running sport being a big puzzle, right? And so trying to figure out the pieces of the puzzle. And unfortunately, it's not a puzzle that you can just order off Amazon. And once you figure out how to put it together, you're good to go. We all have different puzzle pieces and we have to figure out what works for us. And then obviously things change as we age, get older, as our life situations change, all those things. So this is why it's important to really monitor this closely in this term of this like reflective practice after each training cycle, if you will. Okay, so goal setting. So I'm not here to spell out the SMART acronym that everyone has heard in some class or some job training at some point in their lives. But I do want to talk about this different types of goals, right? So the objective goals versus the process goals. And so the way I think about this is they're equally important. So the time on the clock, whatever these big goals we're chasing, I think in running, it's oftentimes a finishing time, right? Is oftentimes, not the most important thing. I think that there's an equal importance between nailing your training, nailing your nutrition, staying healthy. There's so many things that are valuable beyond what that clock might say. And I have, a little voice in the back of my head that's kind of laughing at me right now because I myself have gotten stuck on the numbers so many times, even recently. It's very, very hard, I think, as a runner, to try to find success in other ways. And so I'm encouraging you to at least sit down at the beginning of a training cycle, write down what are other ways I could be successful in this training cycle that aren't related to how the actual one day goes. Because we think we've got one day that a lot of us rest our success upon when we've put in so many days before that where we were really successful and we really nailed it, right? And so we can't forget about those days. And so that's where the process goals come in, because we can be successful with process goals no matter what happens on race day. And I think it's important that we, as runners or as people, right? This is a human thing. We want to feel like we're being successful, like we're progressing, like we're doing what we set out to do. And so the first piece of that is knowing what is it that we're setting out to do, right? So sit down, write down some things in terms of like actions, intentions, and habits that you want to have. Maybe it's, being a morning runner, right? Making sure you get your run in the morning, because the way life is, evening is impossible at the time. Or maybe it's drinking water, right? I think a lot of us have a hard time drinking water throughout the day, right? So hydration goals. Maybe it's a mindset goal, right? Like, we all approach these training cycles wanting to nail every single workout, but that doesn't always happen. And so maybe we make a goal around staying positive, even if we have a bad day out on the run, right? And so these things are, even though they seem sort of trivial, to write them down and say, this is my goal, and putting it somewhere where you can see it. I'm going to talk a lot here towards the end of what all the reminders I have around my apartment to remind me of what these goals are, because like I said, I lose sight of this really easily, and I don't think I'm alone in that. And I freely admit it, but writing these down, putting them somewhere where you're going to see it quite frequently, and remind yourself that there's other ways to be successful than just the mileage per se. But of course, this means we don't need to ignore objective goals or not set objective goals, right? So maybe it's a placement in a certain race. Maybe we want to beat a friend or a family member that we have a little rivalry with locally, or maybe we want to hit a certain mileage goal, which I think is, I don't think, as a coach personally, I don't think mileage is everything, but I think it's pretty cool, when you get to the end of the week and you're like, that's the most miles I've ever run in a 7-day period. And that's pretty cool. So we just have to ask ourselves, what's important to us? What is going to be meaningful? And what is going to get us out the door when we really don't want to, right? So writing those down, whether it be on a piece of paper, sticking it on the fridge, or I have whiteboards. I love whiteboards. Putting it somewhere where you frequent so that you see it as often as you can. Okay, here we go. Support team. So ask yourself, who and what do you need to achieve these goals? On this particular slide, I only talk about who, but I'm going to touch upon what as well. But so we have to think about our support system, right? So who are going to be there to pick up the slack potentially if some things fall by the wayside as we're putting more energy and effort into training. I don't know if you guys are familiar with they've since split up, but the couple Lauren Fleshman and Jesse Thomas, professional triathlete, professional runner. They have two kids, and they used to have a podcast I used to really enjoy called Work, Play, Love. And they used to talk about primary parenting, which obviously I know this isn't practical for everyone, but just if something you haven't heard before, I found it super interesting where when one of the partners had a big goal coming up, like if it was a race or something like that, they would take over the primary parenting duties. Then they would switch when then the next person had a big endeavor. So like Lauren was writing a book, and that's when Jesse took over more of the parenting, for example. So kind of working these, not saying that this is exactly how it has to look or that this is practical, but thinking about how can you split up or make things a little bit easier on yourself, and then obviously give back to your partner when the race is over. So yeah, leaning on family and friends is super important in this time. I know I'm talking about this as if they're like, I mean, training cycle is a big endeavor, right? But I do think we perhaps take ourselves a little too seriously sometimes, but I do think it's important to think through the logistics like this. So then next comes like, okay, who's gonna train with you? Like I know that people have varying opinions about training with people, or some people like to run by themselves, but identifying what training partners, what running clubs or groups that you can enter that might be able to get the best out of yourself, and if anything, be really good company, and swap all kinds of crazy stories as we do on the run. And then this next little group is a lot more on the instructive side or the scheduling side of things, the nuts and bolts of your training cycle, right? So, we're all in varying and various steps of our journeys here. So you may have tried using some of these these professionals in the past, or maybe not. But people like a coach, a sports dietitian, either a therapist or a sports psychologist on the mental health side. And then, of course, me being biased, I think having a physical therapist on your team is awesome as well. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a physical therapist. It can be a chiropractor you trust. It can be anyone who really understands running, understands your body, and who can help maintain your physical health as you are going through a training cycle. And there's nothing wrong with giving the body some TLC as you keep going. I think some of my patients get a little down that like, oh gosh, I wish I didn't need to come and see you type of situation. But I really challenge that mindset in that we're really pushing our bodies. And if our body is pristine, we're probably not pushing that hard, right? So there's a delicate balance there, but there's just absolutely nothing wrong with seeing some sort of body worker, physical therapist, chiropractor with some frequency as you're going through your training cycle. I am a big believer in having a coach. Obviously, I am a coach myself, and I have seen I made all my big jumps as a runner. I wouldn't say late in life, right? But this was in 2020 when I hired my coach, and so this was 4 years ago. I was 28 at the time, hadn't run a PR in a long time, so having someone who has that 10,000-foot view who can help take off that burden of deciding what to do can be really helpful. But of course, a lot of our education around the training cycle here is going to be for that person who may not have a coach and needs to do some of these things on their own. And we're going to touch on the sports dietitian piece actually on the next slide. Okay, so I think this is what a lot of people are excited about. And I don't want to let people down because this is not necessarily my area of expertise, but I am a big believer in, getting blood work with some frequency, right? So routine blood work, especially as an athlete. I don't even want to say especially as an athlete. I think this is important for all people so that we can, really catch things early, find out what's going on, look under the hood, if you will. I certainly make a lot of car references for someone who knows nothing about cars. And I was thinking through this earlier and I was like, gosh, I make a lot of car metaphors because I think it makes sense to people, and cars are machines, right? And I'm like, well, the big difference between humans and cars is that humans have emotions, and that changes everything. So we're not necessarily cars, but this is our version of getting things checked on before we go on a long road trip, right? And so this is obviously an extremely short list. But the big markers to try to keep it as simple as I can for you guys are listed here, especially the iron, vitamin D, and thyroid piece of this. And the other pieces are a little bit more nuanced depending on your individual situation where you are. So iron is a tricky one and could be an entire presentation on its own. But my big point I want to make here is that so if you haven't had your ferritin checked, which I think a lot of people may not have because it's not typically included in blood work you get at a regular doctor's office. So if you get a CBC with sort of some comprehensive blood work, you're going to get total iron and iron saturation capacity or percentage, but not necessarily ferritin. And ferritin is the marker that tells us how well we're actually storing the iron. So those measures that you're typically getting within the doctor's office is just how much iron is free floating, but the absorption is the iron that you're actually able to use for oxygen carrying, which is the good stuff, right? And so the other piece about ferritin too is that we as athletes require, or our optimal ranges are higher than the typical person. So you could get back a ferritin level and your physician be like, oh yeah, you're fine. Your iron is absolutely fine. Whereas for an athlete, we should be in a higher range. So for example, 50 to 75 is the ideal range for ferritin. For most physicians are probably going to tell you you're fine if you're, above 15, which is actually pretty low for a distance runner. So just keeping these things in mind and being able to educate yourself. And this is where a sports dietitian, for example, or a sports physician who knows about the idiosyncrasies and nuances of being a runner can help sort of guide you there with your supplementation and things like that. But based on what I've learned from my sports dietitian friend, shout out to Kacy, is that if you are under 50, you should probably be taking a supplement and then monitoring as needed, making sure that it's trending around the same and not going down, particularly with heavier training. Vitamin D is a big one for a lot of people. It tends to be lower, especially for a lot of us who spend a lot of time inside and working and things like that. So always a good idea to keep a pulse on vitamin D, but it's important for bone health, energy levels, energy conversion, all of those things. And so important to keep a pulse on that. And then thyroid levels can tell us a lot about fueling. So this again is a much deeper topic, but looking at our thyroid levels, we can see if we've been potentially under fueling, either intentionally or unintentionally, and can tell us about our caloric intake and things like that. And again, this is something that you need to have someone interpret. There are a lot of services out there. I don't really want to call out any certain companies, but there's companies that offer blood work and guidance around the blood work. And my big advice would be to work with someone individually with this to really help you get what you need. And then of course, hormone levels is important no matter what, but it becomes a little more important in like premenopausal and those sort of transitional times of life, just to make sure that hormone levels are where they should be. Okay, so I'm going to be pretty brief here because this is going to be a whole nother talk later, and it's going to be fantastic. But in regards to starting a training cycle, I always like people to consider, and we may be chronologically, this might be something you try your next training cycle, but to consider a strength focus in between. So what does this mean, right? So This means that we prioritize the strength. Maybe we experiment with exercises that kind of can make us sore. Maybe we load up the weight a little bit more. Maybe we invest in a personal trainer or a coach or someone to really help us double down on the strength aspect of it. So these are the times, and I work with my athletes to do phases like this too, where I tell them like, hey, it's okay to feel crappy running in these times. Like legs a little heavy, sore from the weights, that's fine. Running is actually not our priority right now. Because I think people get really stressed out about being sore. And so being able to take these times where we can prioritize it without being too stressed about getting our workouts in, I think is really key to make those strength gains, so that when we are running more, all we got to do is maintain it. And that's much, much easier for a lot of people, especially if you don't have as much of a strength background. And of course, this piece is important if you had a recent injury or if you were managing something in your last training cycle. So again, part of that reflection piece, what things did you find yourself always foam rolling? What did you find yourself in the PT office for? What muscles were getting fatigued with your harder efforts, like were your calves just smoked after every long run, for example. So these are the things to kind of check in with our body, and try to figure those things out. And again, I don't recommend doing this alone. Asking a PT or a strength coach or someone who knows the body, knows strength training, and can help you work through these things. But again, we're going to talk a lot more about this in a future talk. So I'm going to leave it there for now. Okay, so training base. So this is where we're starting. This is our starting point, right? And that's exactly what it is. We have to start where we are. I think some people, they flip the calendar to the start of their training cycle and they just go gun-ho, right? And that's the point of a training cycle, is to gain fitness. You're not supposed to start fit already. And so it's expected to have to ease into things. You don't have to be, high up in terms of your spectrum of fitness when you start a training cycle. And so I think people try to do these things too quickly, and that's what can end in injury. So my big takeaway here is to start where you are, and to be okay with not necessarily having all the base that you want. I think it's actually a really great thing to get detrained a bit. And as much as it hurts us as runners, I think, to have to kind of fight that battle of getting back into running, I think like if we stay in like this constant middle zone, it's a lot harder to make those bigger jumps. And so I think that the detraining is actually important to be able to make that next big breakthrough. But as a guideline, we obviously don't want to get injured because we've been sitting on the couch doing nothing. So as a guideline, being somewhere in that 20 miles a week for 5K and 10K training, 30 to 35 miles a week for half marathon and marathon training, maybe a smidge higher if you're a marathoner. But again, we just want to be in a place where you're ready to start to take on some mileage without getting hurt. And then the other big piece, or another big mistake I see people make, is that they go right into that first big workout, or not first big workout, but they start into workouts that are a little bit more taxing, or a lot more taxing than perhaps they're ready for. So really trying to ease into the speed work, doing strides to do legs turning over, to get that stimulus of running faster without the actual stressor on the body. So that we are ready and we have the tools in place when we do start doing some real workouts. I'm going to sound like a runner here, but people say, well, strides aren't a real workout. Well, they can be if you do them correctly. But so easing into speed work is really important. I think that is a little bit, I'm not going to like try to make superlatives here, but I think between mileage and speed work, those are the two variables we're looking at in terms of overtraining or too much too soon. So we have to treat both of those equally. So even if we're at the same mileage, but introducing speed work, we're effectively increasing the intensity of our training. So I know that a lot of coaches talk about not changing two variables at once. So we're going to keep mileage the same and add speed work, or increase mileage without the speed work, for example. And again, this becomes a little bit less relevant if you do happen to have a coach. Okay, so I'll leave you guys with this. This is one of my all-time favorite quotes. Don't mean to be unprofessional, but I want a tattoo of patience in practice somewhere on my body at some point. But this is a Maya Angelou quote. It says, "Seek patience and passion in equal amounts. Patience alone will not build a temple. Passion alone will destroy its walls." And I can't tell you how many times I've destroyed my walls with being a little overzealous or too passionate. And I think, and every time I've started a training cycle thinking I'm going to do more than I did before, I'm going to work harder, I'm going to do more things, it doesn't end well. But the times where I've just sort of allowed the training cycle to come to me have gone really, really well. So just a note of obviously that all of this education is put forth so that we can check more boxes and perhaps look under turn some stones that maybe haven't been turned yet. But we also just have to figure out what works for us. And it's a puzzle. It's not necessarily a like barbaric, like pounding the hammer through the wall type of situation. So yeah, that is all I have. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and hopefully I figure out the kinks there. But I'm gonna end the recording here unless Eli, you have any questions or comments.
No, great presentation that speaks a lot to me as someone who's trying to get back into a training cycle. Some things that I know that I need to be reminded of, but some things I didn't know and appreciate. So I did have one question about, like, with the getting the blood tests. Are those the kind of things that you think like someone could ask their primary care physician to run those? Are they like prohibitively expensive, or I don't have any insight into asking for special blood tests?
Yeah, so they should not be prohibitively expensive. They may be like a little bit extra to add on to like a routine blood work draw, for example. I've always done this through like a third party, essentially, like through Quest.
Okay.
They have a panel where you can do iron panel and then you can add on. So I kind of customize my own thing because I know, right? And I know just enough, maybe just enough to be dangerous. But I've always done this without a physician because it is can be kind of a pain. But the ferritin and like the total iron markers are the big things that you should have to ask for specifically. Everything else should be in like included in like a routine blood draw.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I want to make sure if you had any questions that I answered them. I'm